Hello, this is Vivica Williams, and you're watching Head to Head. Just about a week ago, U.S. President Donald Trump withdrew the United States from the Iran denuclearization deal. The agreement called for Iran to dismantle its nuclear weapons program in exchange for the lifting of sanctions. U.S. allies are adamant that the deal was not just between the U.S. and Iran. The leaderships of Britain, France, Germany, and the EU have all said they will keep the agreement alive. To talk more about this, we welcome to our studio today Mykola Kapitonenko, Director of the Center for International Studies. Hello, and thank you for joining us today. So can you tell us about the reasons why the U.S. pulled out of this deal?
Obviously, Trump thinks that the deal is bad, and he was quite open about it before the elections and after the elections, and was considering that there are no enough guarantees that Iran will become a denuclearized state. And in some respect, he is right, because it is never possible to guarantee that a state which is close to becoming nuclear will one day get rid of its nuclear capabilities. We can remember South African Republic, which is only one example when a state which was nuclear got rid of its nuclear weapons. We have also Ukraine, Belarus, and Kazakhstan, but they were not controlling the nuclear weapons which were stated on their territories. So in some specific angle, Trump is right that there is no way to guarantee Iran would not become nuclear again, especially after sanctions are lifted and he get more economic opportunities. It would be easier for Iranian leadership to get back to military nuclear program. But on the other hand, European allies are also right, because pulling out of a deal means pushing Iran closer to getting back to its military nuclear program. So I think we should wait and see, really, but there is some logic behind Trump's decision. So
it seems, though, that there was this move of this either-or kind of move versus maybe there could have been some reconsideration of the deal or reworking of it versus just completely withdrawing.
That has been on the table. That was Trump's suggestion, that the deal should be re-examined, and he actually was talking to U.S. European allies and asking them to back him and to put more pressure on Iran and to rewrite the deal. But and the deadline was the 12th of May. But they decided that the deal is okay for them. That's their absolute right to do that. And now we have a split among allies, the United States on the one side and the European allies on the other. And that is one of the difficulties when we are dealing with multinational sanctions.
Right.
This is something which is a key obstacle for those sanctions to be effective, because they split partners when they see things differently.
Absolutely. Well, and we can look even at the example of Cuba, in which the U.S. was the only country really that maintained sanctions for a long period of time.
Or we may look at the example of Ukraine. In case when we are favoring anti-Russian sanctions, one of the key things here is to maintain the unity of allies and to commit collective pressure on Russia. But in case when strategic interests are different, and they are already different, but Germany's position, for instance, is different from the one of the United States, there is a risk that positions of Western allies could split once again over sanctions against Russia.
And this is, as you said, this is a major issue. Sanctions only work if there's a united front.
Absolutely.
So when we look then at some of the next steps for Iran, we know that the leadership of France, Germany, Britain, and the EU are going to be holding a separate meeting to discuss the U.S. decision as well as their next steps. So what, as an analyst, do you see maybe developing from this?
Sure, I think that the most probable scenario here is that Iran would try to split the allies and to maintain the logic and the deal which has been established and signed in 2015. So he would at least look like sticking to that deal and will try to persuade Europeans that their sanctions should not be back. At the same time, he will have a separate talks with the United States, and at that table, a threat of renewing military nuclear program would be much more seriously put forward.
And do you consider, because I mean, it's hard to say what Trump's reaction or how he's hard to predict, it's unpredictable. So do you see in this case that being an effective tactic to use with President Trump, this threat of he doesn't seem to react well to these threats in this case.
That's an interesting issue because if you look back at the American anti-proliferation strategy, which was established back in 40s and remains one of the most principal, key, long-standing priorities of American foreign policy, you could see that three main types of instruments have been developed to prevent other nations from becoming nuclear. Sanctions, military interventions, or let's say separate attacks which targeted specifically against nuclear objects, and security guarantees. And these last was working best of all, because the United States expanded in the recent 70 years. They expanded the network of its security alliances or guarantees over dozens of states, which was not usual for American foreign policy before. And that worked best of all. Sanctions work much worse. And
they took a long time to work.
Absolutely.
As well.
And that is also one of the risks of Trump's strategy. He will not have strong answers enough to talk to Tehran.
And the Middle East is especially tricky location now. Now we're seeing with the U.S. opening its embassy, Israeli embassy in Jerusalem. This is creating some turmoil, significant turmoil in the Middle East. How are you seeing that this plays in with this increasing, going back to sanctions against Iran, while the U.S. changing this relationship with Israel? What are you seeing? Are you seeing some type of policy, or do these seem more like independent actions?
I see a very strong alliance on the one hand between the United States and Israel, and on the other hand I see several important contradictions which potentially may lead to quite sharp conflicts between the United States and Iran on the other hand. And that altogether could certainly destabilize Middle East even more. But what is more dangerous is that if there is a growing probability that Iran would go nuclear one day, that would lead to a chain reaction of the neighboring states, and a number of them are capable of at least developing or becoming closer to getting nuclear weapons. And if that would be the case, then we would talk of a completely different level of instability in the Middle East.
Well, it seems that before that could even happen, it appears that Israel is quite aggressive at unilateral action on preventing this development, whether in Syria or in Iran as well. And do you how much influence do you think Israel had on Donald Trump's decision to pull out of this deal?
I don't think that one should exaggerate that influence, because dealing with nuclear weapons has a long strategic culture of decision-making in the United States. And when you are talking about deterrence, when you take decisions about deterrence, long strategic factors, long-term factors are at place. It's not about lobbying, and it's not about protecting one's national interests or even protecting one's allies. It's much more strategic issue. So I think there is a strategic logic behind Trump's decision, not only lobbying by Israel. But on the other hand, there is a very difficult situation in Syria, where further destabilization and further raise of influence by Iran could endanger Israel's position. That's why it's aggressive, because it perceives the situation as challenging its basic security interests.
Absolutely.
That is why it's the only way, that's the usual way Israel reacts to foreign threats.
Okay. And for just the last question, what are some of the takeaways or thoughts or expectations you have for the next month or several months?
Basically, the most interesting thing for me is that how the U.S. pulling out of a nuclear deal would influence the perspectives of talks with both Koreas, because these issues are interconnected, and probably the most attention one would expect from a North Korean leader to the situation over Iran. And many people have been talking recently about North Korea getting rid of its nuclear weapons in exchange of lifting sanctions or economic assistance or things like that. But in my opinion, and this opinion becomes even stronger over time, there would be no enough motivation. There is nothing the United States can credibly offer to North Korea in order to make it get rid of its nuclear weapons. So that would mean a further deterioration of non-proliferation regime globally, and that would be probably the most important outcome of what we had over Iran last week.
All right. Well, we're going to have to wait and see. And as things develop, we're definitely going to have some comments from you about what's going on.
Okay.
Thank you Thank you so much for joining us today.
Welcome.
And we were speaking with Mykola Kapitonenko, Director of the Center for International Studies. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for more.